Kellen.
Good. How are you today? Good, good. Thank you. Okay, great. Good afternoon. My name is Terry Glavin. I'm counsel for the City of Chicago Department of Procurement Services. I first want to welcome you on behalf of Mayor Rahm Emanuel, Commissioner Jamie Rhee, the Chief Procurement Officer for the City of Chicago. I want to extend my appreciation, our appreciation to you for taking time out of your schedules to be here to learn about doing business with the City of Chicago. I'm going to use the next hour or so to give you as much information as I can, but I encourage you to follow up with the Department of Procurement Services webpage. It's very useful. It has a lot of additional information, reference materials. I also want to encourage you to feel free to reach out to me in the future. I'll give you my contact information up front so I don't forget. And that way, if you have questions when you leave here today or in the future, you can reach out to me. If I'm able to answer any questions you have, I'll do my best to do that. If I'm not the best resource, you can still contact me and I'll find the best resource for you at the city. So my contact information is, first of all, my email is terrence.glavin@cityofchicago.org. So that's terrence.glavin@cityofchicago.org. And a number where you can reach me at the Department of Procurement Services is 312-744-0851. If you were unable to get any of that or you think you made a mistake, I'll just remind you this presentation is being streamed online, so you can go to YouTube, review anything, including my contact information or any additional information I provide. You can review it at your leisure, at your office, or at your home. And I'll also, along those lines, encourage you to look at the workshop schedule. One is posted outside, one's posted online. We also have handouts. And I encourage you to either in person attend workshops in the future like this one, or in the alternative, go online and look at other workshops that are streamed. They're streamed live. They are also kept in the inventory of videos on YouTube, on our YouTube homepage. So there's a lot of information out there. I teach a number of workshops. This is one of them. But we have experts that cover many different topics, many different workshops. And many of those workshops are taught by deputy commissioners here at the Department of Procurement Services and managers that have an expertise in certain areas. And so we have a very talented pool of speakers that can inform vendors about various areas of the procurement process. But today we're going to talk about doing business with the City of Chicago. The topics I'm going to cover today are briefly the mission statement of the Department of Procurement Services, a little bit about us, the laws that govern the procurement process, talk about types of procurement, get into certification, contract monitoring and compliance, programs, and bid incentives, and we'll spend a little time with some screenshots navigating the Department of Procurement Services webpage. And finally, I'll open up the session to questions and answers. During the session, if you don't mind, I will just try to move through the material to make sure we stay on schedule. And then if you save your questions to the very end, I'll field questions at that time. If there's a question that you feel is really specific to you, your company, or a project that may not be of interest to others here, or you just have no desire to ask your question while we're streaming live, then I'll stick around after the session and be available to answer questions that are more specific to your situation. So we are the Department of Procurement Services, and we are the contracting authority for the City of Chicago. Along the way throughout the session, I'm going to throw out a few tips here and there. Hopefully it'll be helpful to you at some point in your contracting process. And one tip is we are the Department of Procurement Services for the City of Chicago. There are sister agencies that surround us. And if you've lived in Chicago or if you're new to Chicago, you may think a lot of the things going on around you are operated and purchased, put into place by the City of Chicago, by our department, when in reality there are many other sister agencies that work within the operations environment. For example, Park District runs the parks, recreational facilities, trains that are flowing around us on the L tracks. Those trains are operated by the Chicago Transit Authority. When we have conventions at McCormick Place or activities at Navy Pier, that's a Metropolitan Pier and Exposition Authority. That's another sister agency. That's McPier. Each of those sister agencies have their own procurement authority. They are their own governmental units. They have their own websites, they have their own procurement departments, and they have their own policies, rules, and procedures. They also, which is probably the most important thing to you, they have their own opportunities. So I encourage you to go to their websites, see what opportunities they have in addition to ours, but be aware that you may call us, you may be monitoring our website, and you might miss that opportunity that's nearby that's on another agency's website. So I encourage you to look around. If you want to know what the sister agencies are and how to find them online, you can go to our website, cityofchicago.org. If you go to the top drop-down menu, click on Government, it'll list in the drop-down menu all the city departments, and to the left there is a list of a link to sister agencies. And then through those links you can see other agencies' websites. On that same menu, as I mentioned, there are a list of all our departments. It's not a bad idea, just for your own business intelligence, to start thinking about what departments it is that would have an interest in your product or service. That's another bit of information I think that'll be helpful to you, especially if you're new to city contracting. For example, if you sell police cars, it's probably helpful to you to start going to the specific homepage for the police department in that menu and start looking and getting familiar with the police department. If you sell software or computer hardware, do it. The Department of Information Technology, there's a link to their department's homepage, and you can get familiar with their department. And by following what they're up to, a little bit of the news on their webpage, you can start getting familiar with what their needs are, and based on those needs, you may have a potential customer in the future. Now, when we put contracts into place, or when we establish business relationships between the city and vendors, we don't just hand business over to vendors. We follow certain laws, policies, procedures, and rules that govern the procurement process. The state law is the Municipal Purchasing Act of Illinois. The local law that establishes our department and our authority over contracting is the Chicago Municipal Code, Section 2-92. I'm not saying you have to become an expert in the law by next week, but I do want to say always, it's a good idea to start getting familiar with the law, because as you'll learn from the presentation today and others, contracts are awarded in various ways through a competitive process, typically. And any competition has to have rules, and those rules are established by state law, municipal code, and even by our department's policies and procedures that we're allowed to draft. And what that does is that allows certainty in the system, integrity in the system, and it gives everyone equal opportunity to compete for work and for city dollars in exchange for that work, or in exchange for goods. Now, if you do want to see the Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act, it's actually pretty easy to find. If you go to any search engine, type in Municipal Purchasing Act, Illinois, it'll come up on the first page. I can almost guarantee it. If you want to see the municipal code, there's a good website. It's the authorized publisher of the municipal code. It's amlegal.com, amlegal.com. You go to that website, it'll give you a list of jurisdictions. You click through Illinois, then you click through Chicago, and then you can get the municipal code. And again, 292 is the section that is relevant to our contracting authority. Now, what do we buy? We buy goods and services. I mean, really, that's at the fundamental level how you break down categories as far as procurement's concerned, at least is the way we see it. But then you have to determine how to put a contract in place for those goods or services. And the methods are small order process, competitive bids, request for proposals, request for qualifications, and or job order contracting, or JOC. And which process we choose depends on what we're buying, goods or services, and oftentimes on how much we're buying or what the spend is, how many dollars are being spent. So that'll determine what process you have to follow. I'm going to talk about how each process works. I get into more detail in another workshop, Procurement Fundamentals, but I'll give it at a high level today so you at least have some context for doing business. Now, small orders. What are small orders? When we're going to make a total contract purchase of under $100,000. By law, it's a little more flexible of a process. There's no requirement of a formal bid specification or public advertisement, but we do solicit quotes, and we can do it by telephone, fax, written quotation, posted on our DPS website. So again, it's important to look at those websites, not just ours, but other agencies. They oftentimes have a similar process for smaller purchases. So these are some of the methods by which we can solicit. City of Chicago certified MBE-WBE vendors are solicited first, and I'll get into what MBE-WBE means shortly. And then for bids over $10,000 but under $100,000, MBE-WBE compliance is required. I'm going to talk about it later, but MBE stands for Minority Business Enterprise, which has to be certified, or WBE is a women-owned business enterprise, again, a certified firm. If it's over $100,000, it's much more formal. By law, we have to advertise in a newspaper with a certain size circulation. In our case, it's the Sun-Times. We do it in the daily classified section. So if you're looking for opportunities, not just online, but in print media, you can go to the Sun-Times, go to the classified ad section, and in the classified ad section, you're going to see a whole grid of governmental units that have little takeouts or little sections. And it's not going to tell you every detail about what projects are about. What it's going to tell you, or what it's going to do, is it's going to give you a taste of what the project's about. So it'll be the agency, it'll be what the project identifying numbers are, and there'll be a brief description, like City of Chicago is buying police cars. It won't tell you how necessarily all the details of how many. It won't necessarily tell you how big they are, the specifications, the size, how many doors. It's just going to tell you we're buying police cars. If you're interested, pick up a bid package. And if you see something that seems appealing to you, what you can do is come on down to the Department of Procurement Services. You sign out a bid package. And that bid package is going to contain a whole bunch of documents, but what they're going to contain is specifications. Specifications are documents that detail what it is we want to buy, right down to the detail. And when you pick up that bid package, you're going to want to read through every document, every word, every letter, and make a decision whether or not you're going to submit a bid. And if you're going to submit a bid, the bid's going to be submitted to the bid and bond room, where we're standing or sitting today. Bid solicitation periods are 10 to 30 calendar days. And if you read those specification documents, one of the requirements might be a bid deposit. Okay, bid deposits, by the way, are refundable if you don't win the contract. So, but keep that in mind. And that's just one example of why you want to read those bid packages very carefully. Now, Procurement Fundamentals Workshop gets into all these details again, but I'm going to tell you the reasons why you want to read those documents carefully. By law, you have to be, for competitive bids, the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Lowest bid, we all know what that is. You just have to have the best price. Responsive means you have to commit to giving us what we want the way we want it, right down to the details of the specification. Responsible means you're presently capable of giving us what we want the way we want it, right down to the specification. So those are the three main points you want to make sure you're able to hit when you're making a decision whether or not you're going to use your time and resources to put together a bid and submit. Okay. Now, again, I encourage you to go to the workshop, get more details on procurement fundamentals. One thing that bid documents might tell you, in addition to those details about what we're buying, that there might be a pre-bid conference. A pre-bid conference is an opportunity to come in, you've read the specifications, you've read the bid documents or the bid package, and you get a chance to talk to the people who are in charge of the project and ask them questions. The questions might get answers if it's appropriate, and answers can come by way of clarification, a written clarification. So everyone that signed out a bid package, if there's a question that comes up that justifies an answer, but it doesn't really change the specs, it just needs to be clarified for everybody, we'll send out to everybody what's called a clarification. That's a written document that just basically answers questions. However, sometimes you get that question that makes everyone realize, wait a minute, we've got to fix our specs a little bit, or something needs to be adjusted a little bit. If we're going to modify the bid package or the specifications in some way, we very well may issue an addendum. An addendum will go out to everybody, and the difference between an addendum and a clarification is a clarification, you typically don't have to do anything about it. You just have, you're on notice, great, I have my answers. An addendum, though, you typically have to acknowledge that you received it, submit it with your bid package so that we know you're committed to those changes. So that's part of the process, correct, or initial it, and then you sign your total bid package, perhaps. But it gives you a chance, the pre-bid gives you a chance to review specifications. Bidders get to attend. Side note or tip, pre-bids are actually not a bad place to network. It's not really necessarily part of the formal bidding process, but the pre-bid gives you a chance to see what other vendors are in your industry interested in this work. Maybe it creates the opportunity to talk a little bit about other projects. Maybe it gives an opportunity to learn where there's subcontracting opportunities if you're not the ultimate winner on that project. So it's a great way to network. If you are a certified firm, an MBE, WBE, DBE, and I'll explain all these acronyms later, again, networking, especially for subcontracting opportunities, is not a bad idea. So pre-bid conferences give you that opportunity. If there's no pre-bid meeting, then you can reach out to the person at our department who's responsible for the project. Their name will be on the documents that you pick up. Their contact information will be on the documents. You can reach out to them and you can ask questions if there's no pre-bid conference, and you can get answers through that person directly. There's also the possibility, and this is really if there's, for example, construction or there's work at a difficult site, there might be site inspections prior to the bid. So keep in mind, read those documents. If there's a site inspection offered, make sure that you at least are aware of it. Sometimes site inspections and pre-bids are optional. Sometimes they're mandatory, and the documents will say that. Make sure if anything's mandatory that you show up for it, because if you fail to show up for it, what happens? You're possibly not one of the three things you need to be. You're not responsive. And if you're looking at documents, read them all carefully when you submit a bid. Make sure you cross your T's, dot your I's, initial everywhere it says you must initial. Give us every document that we're asking for and that we state must be submitted. Again, you fail to do any of those things. You fail to sign your name at the end of the bid, or you fail to initial an addendum, tossed, because your bid's going to be rejected as non-responsive. This is really just a highlight of everything I've just said. But remember, I can't emphasize enough, fill out all required information. Remember to submit the bids the way that we ask them to be submitted, or they'll be rejected. Sign and execute every document where you need a notary, get it notarized, and get your documents in on time. Your bids are due by the bid opening date. You have to be timely, before 11 a.m. on the bid opening date. You're late, your bid gets rejected. Make sure if there's a bid fee that's required, that you include it. If there's a bid deposit, you include it. Now I want to make sure you're aware there's a difference between a bid deposit and a bid fee. A bid deposit is like an assurance that you're committed to a project. If you don't win, you're probably going to get it back, as long as you honor your bid long enough for us to evaluate it. Now I have a whole bid and bond workshop that's separate from this. So I'll get into those details. But keep this in mind. When you bid, you don't find out and get your contract that day. There's a whole process of evaluating bids. So what the law requires and that we require is that when you submit a bid, you hold firm or commit to your bid for 60 days for city-funded projects and 90 days for any project that has even one federal dollar. So $1 makes it federally funded. So what does that mean? That means when you submit your bid, we get 60 days to evaluate city-funded projects. How do you know whether it's city or federally funded? Always look to the contract package you picked up. It'll state in there. If you withdraw early, and we come to you and we say, congratulations, we want to give you a contract, you're the lowest responsible bidder, and you say, I'm not interested. A week after I submitted my bid, I realized there's a great project in Milwaukee I want to do, I'm going to head up there. We'll say, that's great, but we're keeping your bid deposit. And that's sort of the penalty for not honoring your bid for the 60 days, or 90 if it's federally funded. Now, what happens at the 60-day mark, or 90-day mark? We come to you, we say, after that period, we want to award you the contract. You can say, I'm not interested, I'm going to Milwaukee, and can you give me my bid deposit? And you're free to go without any type of penalty. Now, we may come to you and say, can you extend? There's some circumstances where it's taking us longer to evaluate bids than we thought. It's a complex project. Can you extend your commitment? And if you agree to do so, that time period can be extended, and your bid is going to remain in the running. But otherwise, keep that in mind, that you are committed for that time period. So if you have certain human, financial resources or equipment, don't overextend yourself. If you commit to us, stay committed for the time period so you don't lose your bid bond. And it's not just the bid bond. Over time, if you have too many of those, then you're starting to get into an issue of responsibility, which was another category I mentioned about being able to contract with the City of Chicago. So make sure you are honorable in your bids. Bid opening, 11 a.m. Monday through Friday except major holidays here in the bid and bond room. Bids are open and read aloud. They're tabulated. What does tabulation mean? It means we take all the vendors' names, all their bid prices, when they're read aloud, and they actually are read aloud at bid opening. We take them, we tabulate them, put them in a sheet, and that sheet is posted on the DPS website. So you can actually see within 24 hours after bid opening what your bid is like in comparison to other vendors. Now, by the way, documents like bid tabulations are available online at the Department of Procurement Services webpage, and I'll talk a little bit later about how to get to the search engine. And that's, again, some useful intelligence. What vendors have been doing business with the city? They are oftentimes going to continue doing business with the city. That's helpful information for, again, networking, subcontracting opportunities, or if you need a subcontractor, you know who's out there. So use the search engine and the Department of Procurement Services webpage to gather information that makes you a more informed bidder and a more informed participant. This summarizes the award process, but quickly, the process flows as follows. There's a determination regarding the bidder's responsiveness and responsibility. We go to the department, who's ultimately going to be your client, like police department in my example earlier, or Do It in my example earlier. They're your clients. We'll go to them and make sure that they are on board with a recommendation of award. We take acceptable bid, make sure all the bid packages are acceptable. We take all the documents. Once we've done these reviews, we run them through a signature cycle. There's multiple parties, multiple authorities that have to sign contracts for the city. If there's performance and payment bonds, we make sure that they're in place. If there's insurance, we make sure, or insurance requirements, we make sure that it's there and it's adequate coverage to protect the city. And ultimately, we award the contract to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Now, everything I just described is the competitive bid process at a fairly high level. And we typically use that for goods, tangible goods, right? Goods that are commonly sold by by more than one vendor. We also use that same process for one type of service, and that's work services. Just to give you an idea, work services are by law services that are considered less than of professional nature. Doesn't mean they're any less valuable to the city. It just means that the law categorizes things all the time, right? And so work services are, for example, landscaping services, security guard services, and there's a lengthy list. But my point being is, again, extremely valuable to the city, but as long as service providers and work services are licensed, as long as they have the minimum credentials they need, at a certain point, it doesn't make as much of a difference whether you go to one versus another, as long as you're getting the best price. That is in contrast to professional services, where you don't always want to go to the lowest priced professional service provider. Healthcare, for example. Do you just look for the flash sale for the physician that you're going to go see? No, you shop around, and you have a budget. We all have a budget. The city has a budget, and we're looking for the best value, but we also, for professional services, want to balance that with the need for quality service. So in the instance of professional services, we use RFPs. That's a request for proposal. And what we are doing, we advertise the same way, we post the opportunities the same way, you have to pick up the documents the same way, but instead of advertising a request for bids, or asking for bids, we request proposals. Proposals are persuasive documents that are submitted by vendors to tell us why they're the best vendors at the best value. We typically do RFPs when we don't have certain in-house professional expertise and we need to go outside the city in order to find it. Not outside the location of the city, but outside of our personnel. And so we do RFPs for those professional services. It is an evaluation process where we assemble groups to evaluate proposals and the respondents, or the vendors that are proposing. You likely will be brought in, unlike a competitive bid, to explain your proposal. You might be asked questions, and you will be scored. The evaluation committee will score you, and based on your score, there will be a recommendation of award or not to award from the commissioner of the department that is going to be the customer. And then ultimately, if you're the highest rated, you get a contract. Now, what happens if we need a pool of vendors? Like, there's sometimes projects where we know there's going to be work. We just don't know exactly what each project's going to be, and we don't know exactly when it's going to occur. That could be affected by funding and a number of other conditions. But we know we're going to need it, and we can't start the solicitation process right when we find out we're going to need it. We need to have the vendors available and ready to go. And when we need those pool of vendors, we use an RFQ. It's a request for qualifications. We send out the request. We advertise the same way. You pick up the documents the same way. But instead of asking for a low bid, instead of asking for a proposal, we ask all vendors for their qualifications. They submit their qualifications. Qualifications submitted, it's like a resume. It's like a corporate resume. Depending on the size of the project, it could be a pretty small set of qualifications you need to submit. If it's a enterprise project, extremely large, qualifications could be binders and binders, showing key personnel, financial stability, past projects, worked for other major municipalities. So it could be extensive. But at the end of the day, we're asking for qualifications. The process is similar to an RFP. You're going to come in, explain your qualifications, you'll get scored, and a pool of vendors that are rated qualified will be put into a pool. What happens when you're put in the pool? Nothing. You're in the pool. What it does in the long run, though, it makes you eligible for future projects. And vendors that are not in that pool are not solicited in the future. So what happens is, if you're qualified, you get what's called a MCA, or Master Consulting Agreement. That is a contract that lays out a general scope of the type of work you're going to be doing that's similar to the other vendors. You'll sit in that pool, you'll have the Master Consulting Agreement, and then when projects come along that are specific, you'll get requests to come in, and you might get a task order. A task order is a mini contract for a specific project that's within the scope of the Master Consulting Agreement. So you're going to perform that task order. You're going to get paid for that service, or, well, I won't, no, it's not for goods because we don't do goods on RFQs, but you're going to perform the services, you're going to get paid on those services, and then you're going to go back in the pool. And you may or may not get work after that, but when you do, it'll come under another task order, which will, again, be in the scope. The master consulting agreements have a lifespan. Could be 3 years, could be 5 years, and when that master consulting agreement ends, we put out another RFQ and let other vendors get an opportunity to get into the pool for future projects. There's some highlights about how pricing is negotiated and the task order process. But again, procurement fundamentals is another workshop to attend. You can get into more details at that workshop. I am not going to get into job order contracting in great detail because we have an excellent workshop taught by our deputy over construction and also other participants in the JOC program that teach at the workshop from the city. But I'll give you just a highlight. If you're in construction, you're probably going to want to go to the JOC program. It's job order contracting. It's basically for smaller to medium-sized projects. It's still a competitive process, but it's a somewhat different type of bidding. There's basically, it's been found that construction projects of these sizes can be broken down into various tasks that are common. Those tasks have been set up in a price book, and vendors bid discounts off the prices in the price book for those tasks. I'm going to ask you to go to that workshop if you're in the construction field, because to really get a grasp for it, it's a good idea to sit and really get all the details, because the context is what's going to help you understand the JOC process. But if you're in construction, please attend that workshop. Okay. Again, it's based off of favorable price adjustments from the price book for work that's going to be performed, and you'll learn more at the JOC project program. There's a whole section or a whole workshop on certification issues, including once you're certified, what to do with that certification. But I'm going to give you some high-level information so that you'll know what the topic's about. There are individuals and groups that have historically been disenfranchised or disadvantaged in government contracting. Therefore, there have been certifications that have been created to recognize those firms. The City of Chicago provides certification for groups that have been historically disadvantaged. These certifications include MBE, that's Minority Business Enterprise, WBE, that's Women-Owned Business Enterprise, DBE, that's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. Footnote, DBE is basically combined MBE and WBE at the federal level. So when we have federally funded projects, we have to follow oftentimes federal laws if we're using federal dollars, and they prefer the DBE requirements, and we do have DBE certification and compliance at the city for that reason. There's BEPD, there's business enterprises owned by people with disabilities, and lastly there's ACDBE, that's Airport Concession Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. That is the DBE when it is applied out at the airport. So when you have airport concessions, then ACDBE is what applies. High level again, if a firm is going to look for certification, the person or people that are the basis for the certification have to be 51% or more owner of the certified firm, and that includes the BEPD program. Just want to make you aware how important contract compliance is at the City of Chicago. We monitor contract compliance, and we also monitor Chicago residency ordinance. Contract must be estimated at $100,000 or more and funded by the City of Chicago for the Chicago residency ordinance to apply. For that, 50% of the total work hours must be performed by the actual residents of the City of Chicago. We also monitor equal employment opportunity to make sure that that is the case on city contracting. We also monitor payments to certified firms. So what's all this business about payments to certified firms? Well, you have to understand a little bit about the certification programs to understand why payments to subcontractors is important and why we monitor those payments. I mentioned earlier MBE, WBE. What are those programs? MBE and WBE programs, simply put, encourage, if not mandate, participation on city contracting by MBE and WBE firms. So if you look at the Chicago Municipal Code that I referenced earlier, the program talks about participation. In participation, there needs to be a certain amount of MBE firms on certain projects and a certain amount of WBE firms on the projects. The contract documents will state what the percentage of participation is. In the past, contracts have had 25% MBE, 5% WBE, for example. Well, what does that really mean? It means, say there's a project for $100,000, and a non-certified firm bids on that project, and let's say it bids in fact $100,000, is awarded the project. The project has participation requirements built in, 25% MBE, 5% WBE. What does that mean? It means that vendor has to commit to bringing on an MBE firm to perform 25% of the work, and a WBE firm to provide 5% of the work, or more. Those are minimums. In return, those vendors, the MBE will receive 25% of actual money for 25% of the work, and the WBE firm will receive 5%, or in my example, $5,000 in exchange for 5% of real work performed on the project. Because it's not just about getting money to the certified firms. It's about building capacity and experience so that those firms can grow and ultimately be competitive in the procurement process. And so that's what the program encourages. And there are specific requirements for participation under the different programs like DBE, BEPD. So I encourage you to go to the certification workshops and learn more about eligibility and also what the programs provide for. Ways to achieve compliance in this environment. Well, the prime can be an MBE, WBE, or DBE firm and get credit. There can be a joint venture where MBEs and WBEs, as well as DBEs, join forces. For example, if there's a large project and you're a historically disadvantaged small firm and you don't have the personnel equipment on your own to perform the entire project, but you'd like to bid as a prime, you don't want to bid as a sub, you might be able to find another complementary certified firm that has the services or resources you don't have. You joint venture, you bid on the project together, and that way you can be a prime. And you can get credit that way. There's subcontracting. I talked about that earlier. You can participate as a subcontractor, or if you're meeting compliance, you can bring on a subcontractor that's certified. And you can also purchase materials that are used in the performance of the contract from one or more MBE and WBE firms. Monitoring again, monitoring. We actually do require payments to subcontractors to be reported. That way we can keep track if subs are actually getting paid. Prime contractors are responsible for submitting weekly certified payrolls and waivers of lien. There is a programs and bid incentives workshop. I teach it. These are some of the topics that you'll hear about at that presentation. It's the programs and incentives. We have programs for Small Business Initiative, that's SBI, if you're in construction. We have a diversity credit program, and we have a mentor protege program. We also have bid incentives for small business enterprises, veteran-owned business enterprises owned by people with disabilities, city-based manufacturers, city-based businesses, apprentice utilization, and alternatively powered vehicles. Just to give you a taste of what bid incentives are, the percentage that I'm about to describe varies depending on which bid incentive we're talking about. But what we do with bid incentives, or what the Chicago City Council has done with bid incentives, is try to encourage certain categories of vendors or certain vendors that participate in contracting a certain way, encourage them to participate in the contracting process. And what they do is they'll give percentages off of bids for evaluation purposes if you fall into one of these categories. So let's say, for example, there's one category you read about. You see one of these, you say, oh, you know, I'm a city-based, actually let's use a city-based business. I'm going to look into this. I go to the workshop. I find out there's a percentage off the bid for city-based businesses. And let's just say, for example, that city-based business incentive is, just for round numbers, this is not the exact number, but let's say for round numbers, 5% bid incentive. So everyone bids. Everyone means there's 2 vendors that bid. One vendor is not qualified for the incentive, one vendor is. Both vendors, coincidentally, bid $100,000 on a project. So what does that mean? It means that the non-qualifying firm, when we look at their bid, we see $100,000. When we look at the qualifying firm in the competition, their bid is viewed as $95,000. They are therefore the lowest responsible bidder at $95,000. When they perform the contract, they get paid at $100,000. So you don't get penalized for utilizing the incentive that way. And it's important, though, to go to the code section of the municipal code that establishes each incentive, because they vary. Like, for example, city-based manufacturers. There's not a flat percentage. In those instances, if a contract is using city-based manufactured goods, the percentage off for evaluation purposes actually fluctuates with the amount of, or percentage of the total goods being contracted for involves city-based manufactured goods. So the more goods that are utilized from city-based manufacturers, the higher percentage we take off of your bid. You know, if you just use a little bit, the incentive will be small. If you use a lot, incentive is big. So it's a tiered incentive. So go to amlegal.com, look at the municipal code. You can look all of these up. You can go to the workshop to get the code sections if you'd like and get more detail. But look those up if you feel like there's anything you may qualify for. The DPS website, I've referenced it quite a bit today because it's very helpful. There are resources throughout the cityofchicago.org website. Our homepage is well stocked with DPS information, Department of Procurement Services information, including award contracts and modifications, payments to vendors, bid tabulations, weekly bid opportunities, a searchable MBE, WBE directory, bid incentives, regulations, policy, rules, and procedures. It's all at cityofchicago.org/procurement. I encourage you to wander around our website. I think it's very useful just in your spare time. I know you have plenty of other things to do, including your own business. But if you can go to the cityofchicago.org/procurement webpage, it'll be worth your time in the long run to start getting additional information. When you go to the center of our department's homepage, there's an icon that says award contract. You click on that, it'll take you to pages like this. You can look up contracts. Remember I mentioned that you can look up past information and learn about who's out there doing business. You can see what terms and conditions were like on previous projects. You can see, in addition to the buying plan that was mentioned earlier, you can see what are the things we're buying. And it's organized so that you can search by vendor name. If you know people in your industry or businesses in your industry that work with the city or with other governmental units, you can find what they've been doing on city projects. If you happen to know a contract purchase order number, you can look it up. You can look up projects by department name. So I mentioned earlier, if you know you're selling police goods, you can look up the Chicago Police Department. If you're selling computer hardware, software, you can look up Department of Information Technology. Specification number is a reference number. You can look things up, and then you can look up things by contract value. So there's a lot of different ways you can get at this information, and this business intelligence, I think, will prove very helpful to you if you plan on doing business with the city. When you do pull something up, it's going to look like this, and you can see there's links to the actual contracts. You can see the dollar amount, award date, who the vendor was, even project description. You can also see disclosures. So if other vendors have been on contracts, the law requires them to file economic disclosure statements. We call them EDS, and there's a whole bunch of information in the EDS about vendors that could be helpful to you in learning. This is the page where you can search the payments that have been made to vendors from the city, the dates those payments were made as well. I mentioned you can find bid tabulations, so if you're curious about what other bidders were putting in for projects, then you can look at bid tabulations and find that out. And lastly, before we do a question and answer session, I want to mention we're very active on social media. So if you go to Twitter, if you go to Facebook, in addition to going to our webpage, you can see constant updates about what it is that we're up to, what we're working on with other departments. So there's a great deal of information. And also, you can sign up for what's called DPS alerts. Those are electronic notifications where we send out details about what we're up to and about projects the city is working on. So before I close out, I want to, again, encourage you to attend the other workshops. I teach some of them myself, but we have excellent people teaching on a variety of topics. So follow us on YouTube, go to the other workshops, and I'm sure it'll help you. It'll help you at the very least in becoming competitive, and I hope what I've passed on to you today is that the procurement process is at the very least competitive in nature, and one of the best ways to succeed in a competition is to become well-versed in the rules of the competition. So I encourage you to do that. And with that, if there are any questions, I'll open it up. If there is a question, because it's streaming online, I'm going to repeat the question, and then I will answer the question after that. And if there's a question you feel, again, is particular to your circumstances, your business, or you just would like to ask it in private, I'm happy to stick around after the session's over and answer those questions. So with that, are there any questions? Yes?
How do you get a term agreement with the city?
A term agreement is a fixed amount of years, and it would be through any one of the process that I described earlier. So a term agreement is, and I'm sorry, I should repeat the question like I said I would. How does one get a term agreement with the City of Chicago? And the answer is a term agreement is a contract that's for a fixed number of years. It might have extension options built into it. Oftentimes a term agreement is what we call a DUR. That's a depend on requirements contract. That means that there's no guarantee of the quantity we're going to buy, but we've just, for bid solicitation purposes, given an estimate. The answer to the question is we do term agreements for commodities or goods. We do them for services as well. We do them for work services. So a term agreement is awarded through either competition, RFP, RFQ, or through a small order process, which is basically competitive bid.
So on our contract, would we list commodity codes? I'm sorry. My question is, concerning term agreement, on our contract, would we list the commodity codes that we can provide? And then the city can look to allow us to bid, et cetera.
Now that's a good question. The question is, can you list commodity codes so the city knows what it can buy? And the answer to your question is it's the reverse. You don't propose what we're going to buy. We put out the solicitation knowing exactly what we're going to buy, right down to the product, right down to the details of the product, even perhaps where, what manufacturers we're going to accept. And then you simply give us a price for what we already know we're going to buy. So you're not selling to us in a competitive bid process. You're telling us you can give us what we already know we want at the best price. Now, I want to point out something, though. Sometimes specifications will say that you are allowed to propose alternatives. if it says that, then what you can do is for certain items, if you think that there's something better or you think that there's something you can provide that's an equivalent at a better price, you can propose it, but we can say no. And if you fail to give a price for the things we did ask for, your bid's going to be rejected. If you do submit a price for what we asked for and you put a notation in there that you could also provide an alternative and the specifications allow for you to propose an alternative, then we can make a decision. So that's one instance where you're kind of on the right track, but it's, I don't want to say rare, but it's not always acceptable. Now, if the specifications or solicitation says no alternatives will be considered and you suggest alternatives, you might be rejected based on that. So you want to make sure, remember, when I say read that bid package, read every detail, word for word, letter for letter. Make sure that you're giving us what we want, the way we want it, unless we say we are open to hearing about alternatives. But even in that instance, you still want to probably bid, not just probably, you still want to bid the lines that we put out there. Now, I mentioned lines. I just want to point out what happens is in goods, contracts, in solicitations for goods and in ultimate contracts, we have all the terms and conditions, all the legal phrases in our documents, but at the end of the day, the contracts for commodities typically include a list of line items. And when you bid, you typically will put a price down for each line, each product we're asking for, or each line that we're asking for. Like, for example, let's say it's a office supply contract. Then what we might do is have line 1, pencils, line 2, erasers, line 3, right? And let's just say the line, I forgot which number already I said, but let's say line 2 was pencils and it was number 2 pencils, and you say, I want to provide something other than number 2 pencils because I can provide them cheaper. We might reject your bid as being not responsive because you didn't give us a price for what we asked for, number 2 pencils. Now, if you include a price and we allowed for you to propose alternatives, then you can maybe give us the price we want and propose an alternative. You could still be safe, but make sure you're allowed to do so under the specs. Okay, is that helpful? Okay, great. Any other questions? Yes.
With regards to the Chicago residency ordinance, do the residents have to be in the city of Chicago, or can they be in Cook County?
It should be City of Chicago for the residency, and then make sure you don't confuse that with project area residence, where you actually have to be a resident of the project area, which is even tighter than the City of Chicago.
Okay.
So, and the answer, I always forget to do it. The question was, just for the streaming video, it's do you have to be a resident of City of Chicago for the Chicago residency? And the answer is yes, you do. Okay. Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
So as a professional service provider, are RFP and RFQ the only bidding methods for a professional service company?
If you're going to get a contract as a result of it, RFQ and RFP are almost always the method for professional services. Now keep in mind there is a process called sole source. If you're a vendor that it can be proven that you are the only vendor that can provide a certain professional service, then there's something called the non-competitive review board. It's for sole source contracting, but there's a whole review process that makes sure that that service provider is in fact the only one that can provide these services. Examples might be, say you have a patented system, or if it's software, you have a copyright and no one else can provide the goods or services. Then there's no need to hold a lengthy competition. If all that can be proved up to the non-competitive review board through hearing and through documentation, then that is another method by which we can award contracts. You do bring up a good point. The process you might see out there sometimes is RFI, that's a request for information. Just note that that is, in fact, a request for information. It does not result in a contract. So if you see it, we really appreciate it when you do submit information for our market research and for us to find solutions to problems where we don't know there's a solution in the marketplace yet. But keep in mind that we don't award contracts as a result of an RFI. Now, we might take the information that's provided to us, digest it, study it, and it may be the basis for a future solicitation, like an RFP or an RFQ or a competitive bid that does result in a contract. But an RFI does not necessarily result in actual contracts for professional services immediately.
Do we get notified for, how do we get notified for RFQ and RFP?
The question is, how do you get notified for an RFQ or an RFP? You do have an obligation, or it's in your best interest to monitor the opportunities that are posted on the Department of Procurement Services webpage. We also have hard copies here at the bid and bond room about opportunities. Sign up for DPS alerts and other methods that we put the word out. You watch the Sun Times, look for opportunities, and visit our webpage regularly. And those are the ways that we get the word out about opportunities. Now, what we don't do on projects is just go to you, for example, and keep you posted every time there's a project, because there's a certain sense of impropriety there. But between us getting the word out and doing our best to keep you informed, and then you staying on top of the information that we're putting out there, between the two of us, we're able to keep you up to speed. Any other questions? Yes.
Are the bid contracts available online for download? The bid packets, sorry.
The bid packages.
You have to come physically to?
You come to the bid and bond room to pick up bid packages. Occasionally you can get bid packages, but primarily the bid and bond room is where you're going to pick up your bid packages. Mm-hmm.
Most of the constructions are too large to download, but maybe work services, commodities, you should be able to download.
And the question was, are bid packages available electronically? And for clarification, construction projects, many of them have too large of files to download, so you do pick those up in person. And then work services and other projects are available for downloading. So thank you. That's clarification, I think a little more specific for you about how you can get bid packages. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Is there guidance on the website for going about the payment? How to put it in properly and, request for payment in the city of Chicago?
Now, that's a good question. Is there a method or how you go about placing your invoice for payment with the city? And the first thing I want to say is we are the authority to put contracts into place. When we put contracts in place, we establish a business relationship between the vendor and the user department. So that's really that next step that answers your question. When we put that contract in place, we're happy to hear from you, but quite frankly, we aren't involved in the process, ideally, for a little while. So what happens is we put the business relationship in place, then you're dealing with the user department that is your customer. They place orders with you. You deliver services or goods to them. If they're accepted as meeting specifications, they're good, then you invoice the department. So if you're selling police cars, your invoices go to the police department. If you are selling software or hardware for computers, you invoice Department of Information Technology. They then forward those invoices over to the comptroller. Comptroller issues payment. So that process of getting those invoices submitted, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to work with your user department. But what I can say is before you even get to that point, what you can do is look at the bid documents. In fact, you, again, have to. There are payment sections that talk about how long the city has to pay, and there's oftentimes details about where invoices should be submitted, electronic invoicing and things like that. So you want to look at the contract documents to answer that question.
For
O'Hare Airport you deal with?
O'Hare Airport, Department of Aviation, you're going to be dealing with them separately. Yes. Now, I don't want to say we wash our hands of everybody and we don't care anymore. We get back into the picture every once in a while. One instance might be sometimes departments and vendors disagree about things. And it could be a reasonable disagreement. Sometimes it's not so reasonable. Sometimes vendors need to file disputes with our department in order to prove up that what they delivered was in fact in accordance with contract provisions and they should get paid. Departments might say, it didn't meet our expectations or contract requirements, therefore we don't want them to be paid. That could be an example of a dispute. If there's ever a dispute, then you do come back to our department, you look on our webpage at the dispute policies, rules, and procedures, and you follow those to file a dispute. You could also, early in the game, get involved with us during the bidding process. For example, if there is a contract you thought you should have won and you didn't, there are bid protest rules that allow you to protest the award of a contract to another vendor. And then lastly, we get involved during contract closeout. Hopefully the relationship was great. We come in just to clean things up and then we move on and do a new solicitation. With that, we are right at the closeout time. If there's any other questions, I'm going to stick around. I'll be happy to talk with you. But otherwise, thank you for your time. Appreciate you coming in. Have a great day.